Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I would like to present my review on the new Space Wolf supplement. I know this video is a little late since the book is already out, but better late than never, right? I've been dealing with a lot of stuff in my personal life for the last few weeks, so it's been hard for me to find time to dedicate to making any videos, but I think I've finally gotten everything in order for the most part, so yeah, it's back to making videos. So anyways, this review is going to assume that you already know the Space Marines Codex decently well. So I'm only going to go over stuff from this new supplement book that I think I would use in my own personal Space Wolf list if I were trying to compete with Space Wolves. Also, since the book is out already, if you want to follow along with the stuff that I'm talking about in this video, then feel free to pause this video and grab your Space Wolf supplement. All the stuff I'm going to be talking about in this video is going to be in the same order that it appears in the book. And I guess with that said, let's get this review on the road. And let's start with the Space Wolf Doctrine ability. So this ability is called Savage Fury, and it's basically the exact same as it was last edition. During the Assault Doctrine, when your units attack in melee combat, their unmodified attack rolls of 6+ generate an additional hit. So basically it's what I like to call exploding sixes. This is actually really good in Space Wolves since it makes the units feel super efficient on their own when combined with their chapter tactic that gives them +1 to hit. So your units are going to be hitting on 2s or 3s if they're using like a Thunder Hammer or a Power Fist, but then with all those extra 6s that you're getting, it basically makes up for all the misses that you would have. So during the Assault Doctrine, it feels like none of your units ever miss in melee combat, or at least they don't miss that often. Combine that with some reroll auras and stuff like that, and you got some very efficient hitting when it comes to melee combat. Sure, this ability only really kicks in on turn 3+, because that's when you can start the Assault Doctrine, since you do have to start in Devastator, then move to Tactical, then get to Assault Doctrine. But in this book, there's actually multiple different ways to have units count as if they are in the Assault Doctrine. So you can be making use of this ability starting turn 1 on multiple units if you really wanted to. But yeah, overall, I really do like this Doctrine ability, and it makes Space Wolves almost feel like a melee version of Imperial Fists, but even better because you got the +1 to hit as well on your entire army. Now let's move on to the stratagems from this book that I could see myself using in competitive Space Wolf lists. Savage Strike. This stratagem is 1 command point if your unit has 5 or less models, or 2 command points if the unit has 6 or more models, and it gives +1 to wound to a Space Wolves unit in melee. This is an incredibly good stratagem since it's very open and doesn't have any restrictions. It can be used on any Space Wolf unit against any unit in the game, and that makes it very practical for competitive 40k. The only real restriction for this stratagem is that it's only for melee attacks and not for shooting, but with a Space Wolves army, most of your units are going to be melee anyways, so this restriction is fine in my opinion. You'll probably use this stratagem the most out of all the stratagems in both this book and the Space Marine Codex, since it can help a lot to bring down those tough units that you otherwise would struggle bringing down, and it makes your melee even more efficient. You can also combo this stratagem with a couple of other stratagems. For example, Honor the Chapter, which is a generic Space Marine stratagem that allows a unit of Assault Intercessors to fight for a second time that turn. So the combo would be to use Savage Strike the first time they attack for 1 command point, then when it comes back around for them to attack again with Honor the Chapter, since Savage Strike lasts until the end of the phase, it will still be active even for the second set of attacks. That's a 3 command point combo, but it can be really good in the right situation. For example, if you're trying to knock a unit off an objective, so that way you stop it from scoring them and hopefully swing the game into your favor. But yeah, overall, this is just a very good stratagem, and again, it's something you're going to be using multiple times every game. Relentless Assault. This stratagem is 1 command point, and you activate it when you choose to consolidate one of your units after combat, and that unit can now consolidate 6 inches instead of 3. This is great for pulling enemy shooting units into combat to stop them from shooting on their next turn, unless of course they have an ability to leave combat and shoot, something like the Ultramarines chapter tactic, or unless that unit is a vehicle or monster, because then they can just shoot into the combat. If that is the case though, sometimes it's still good to pile into those units because you at least force your opponent to shoot into the unit that you offered up, instead of allowing them to shoot at whatever they want, which is most likely your heavy hitting units that are in the back. This stratagem can also be used just to gain some ground and move block the enemy, or even grab an objective, depending on the positioning of your opponent's units, since consolidation moves do force you to have to end your move closer to the nearest enemy model. But in certain situations, it definitely can be used for those two things. Deed Worthy of a Saga. This stratagem is 2 command points and is activated whenever one of your characters completes a deed. If your character completes a deed from the list of sagas, then that character gains the appropriate saga ability. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then just wait for the next section of this video when I go over Warlord Traits, and I will go over in depth how to use this stratagem after talking about all of the Warlord Traits and sagas. But for now, just know that this is an incredibly good stratagem that you'll likely want to use at least once every game. Warrior of Legend. This stratagem is 1 command point and allows you to give your warlord a second warlord trait as long as they aren't a named character. This means you can't give Ragnar or any other named characters an extra Warlord trait, but you can give your Wolflord on Thunderwolf 2 Warlord traits, and you can actually come up with some beastly combos, which I'll talk a little bit about when we get to the Warlord traits. Bestial Nature. This stratagem is one command point and is used in your command phase. You get to pick a single Space Wolves infantry, cavalry, or biker unit, and that unit counts as being in the assault doctrine until your next command phase. This is one of the ways to get your units to count as if they are in the assault doctrine for that extra AP on their melee attacks, and so that you can trigger Savage Fury for those extra hits. Because this stratagem is only one command point, it's better than the generic stratagem Adaptive Strategy, which does something similar for 2 command points, but if you do need 2 units to count as being in the Assault Doctrine that turn, then you can use Bestial Nature on the first one and Adaptive Strategy on the second. Countercharge. This stratagem is one command point and allows one of your Space Wolf units to heroically intervene up to 6 inches. This is a gotcha stratagem, so it gets the best results when your opponent doesn't suspect it. But even against players who are familiar with it and expect it, it does make them think twice about charging certain units depending on how you set up your defensive line. Remember though, in 9th edition, your opponent can target units that heroically intervene into them, even if they didn't declare that unit as a charge target, so you're going to have to think carefully yourself before doing this stratagem all willy-nilly. Make sure you're not just allowing your opponent to get damage off on a better unit. One way to do this is with the Relic Armor of Rust, but we'll get into that when I cover the relics. Also, this stratagem is free when you use it on a character. Keen Senses. This stratagem is one command point and allows a Space Wolf infantry, cavalry, or biker unit to ignore any hit and charge modifiers. It's key that this stratagem says any instead of all, because that means you get to pick and choose which modifiers you ignore and which ones you don't. Otherwise, you'd lose out on any bonuses that your unit gets, like the natural +1 to hit from the Space Wolf's chapter tactic. This is really good when using a unit that suffers -1 to hit naturally, like Wolf Cavalry with Thunderhammers, since that unit will now hit on 2s instead of 3s, even if your opponent has a -1 to hit on their own unit as well. This stratagem can also stop you from suffering -2 to charge through woods, or any other ability that does something similar, like the Impulsor ability when they use that stratagem. Definitely one of the stronger stratagems the army has in my opinion, and it can be applied in many different ways. And the final stratagem to talk about is Runic Wards. This stratagem is one command point and allows a Space Wolf unit to deny a psychic spell as if they were a psyker. Very good in lists where you don't bring a psyker, since you still get access to a tiny bit of psychic defense. It's not something you'll use every game, and if your opponent always rolls 10+ for their spells anyways, then it's definitely not worth spending the command points on, because you'll probably fail denying that anyways. But for those times where your opponent does low roll a crucial spell, this can come in clutch. It's also helpful when you do have a Psyker in your list as well, because normally some opponents will have their Psykers move in such a way so that they're outside of your Psyker's denial range, but then you have this stratagem where you can deny with one of your intercessors or something that's way up on the front lines and within range to deny that spell. Moving on to Warlord Traits. So Space Wolves have this unique thing about Warlord Traits, which is that the Warlord trait affects the Warlord like it would for any army. But when the Space Wolf Warlord accomplishes a certain goal called a deed, that deed is associated with that Warlord trait, and that Warlord trait gains a new ability called a Saga. And that Saga is an aura that affects friendly Space Wolf core units within 6 inches of that Warlord. Here is an example. Let's go over the first Warlord trait, Beast Slayer. This trait gives your Warlord +1 attack if he's in combat with a monster or vehicle, and gives him +1 to hit and +1 to wound when attacking a monster or vehicle. The deed for this trait is for your Warlord to kill a monster or vehicle, and if he does that, then he unlocks the Saga. And the Saga is a 6-inch aura that gives +1 to wound against vehicles and monsters for all Space Wolf core units within 6 inches of the Warlord. So as you can see, these Sagas can be incredibly strong if you accomplish the deed. With that said though, I don't think you should be going out of your way to accomplish these deeds, even though the bonuses are pretty good. Make sure that your Warlord's actually going to be able to live through whatever he's doing and attacking, so that way you don't just put yourself in a bad position and you lose your Warlord for nothing. For example, if you're going to charge something like a Demon Prince, but your opponent has 2 other Demon Princes waiting to go after that charge for their next turn, well then yeah, you probably don't want to sacrifice your Warlord for that, and you would rather just throw away another unit in order to make that trade. So that way you can up trade instead of down trade. But if you can find certain situations where your Warlord can accomplish a deed and make it out alive, then by all means go for it, because these benefits are really good. Just don't put your Warlord in a bad position where he might die the next turn, because then it wasn't worth going for the deed anyways. So especially when using them as Warlord traits, I like to think of these Warlord traits as just Warlord traits, in that the deed and the Saga are just bonuses that can happen over the course of the game if the stars align. That said, if you can find a good opportunity because your opponent mispositioned or something where you can accomplish a deed and make it out like free, then by all means go do it, because then you're going to get the benefit from your saga and those are really going to help you win the game. Keep in mind though that there are other ways to trigger these deeds with other characters, which is that stratagem I talked about earlier, but I'll get into that after I'm done talking about these Warlord traits. Getting back to the Beast Slayer Warlord trait, since I didn't really go over that much other than telling you what it did, I think this trait is best when against lists that are very heavy on vehicles and monsters, so stuff like Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, Demon Engine Spam, Chaos Monster Mash, Nidzilla lists, Dreadnought lists, and so on. This trait can give that extra punch to your Warlord to help you punch through those big units, and then of course the Saga to help your other units punch through those units. With that said, there are certain situations where I can see picking this when your opponent isn't spamming monsters or vehicles. For example, in the streamed game that I played not too long ago with Space Wolves, I took this Warlord trait on my Warlord because my opponent had Magnus in their list, and I figured this would help my army more efficiently deal with Magnus, even though he was one of only 3 monsters in that entire list. Moving on to the next Warlord trait, we have Wolfkin. This trait makes it so that your Warlord is always treated as if they had charged that turn when it comes to Shock Assault. But instead of getting just 1 extra attack for the Shock Assault, they get D3 extra attacks. So every time your Warlord fights, he gets D3 additional attacks. That's pretty good. I've found that this is also great to combo with Beast Slayer and honestly pretty much every other Warlord trait if you want to take any of the other Warlord traits, since you can give your unnamed character 2 Warlord traits with the stratagem Warrior of Legend. So I would almost always pick this as my second Warlord trait for my unnamed character. The deed for this Warlord trait is for your Warlord to kill a single model, which is actually pretty easy to do. The saga you gain when accomplishing this deed is a 6-inch aura that makes it so that friendly Space Wolf core units always count as having charged when it comes to Shock Assault, so you always get that +1 attack on all of your units within that aura. This can be really strong, especially if you're up against a durable army like other Space Marines, where you're going to have combats where you can't just one-shot each other when you charge, and those combats are going to last multiple turns, because if you have this saga kicking around, well, you're always going to get Shock Assault while they don't, which gives you the advantage in combats that last longer. Warriorborn. This Warlord trait makes it so that your Warlord can always fight first if you choose for him to. That means if he gets charged, well, too bad for the opponent because your Warlord gets to fight first. This can be incredibly good in melee versus melee matchups, since like mentioned earlier, you'll always get the swing first, even when charged, which makes this amazing for those matchups. The deed for this Warlord trait is to have your Warlord kill an enemy character in melee. It's not too easy, especially early game, but it's definitely something that can happen later on in the game. The saga you'd gain for accomplishing this deed is again a 6-inch aura from the Warlord that lets friendly Space Wolf core units always fight first. This can be absolutely devastating against another melee army if you get this off, and if you can keep your Warlord alive in order to make use of the saga. A cool combo you can do with this is, let's say your opponent charges your character with their character and a unit of something else, because they know your Warlord's going to get to attack first anyways, so they're bringing in a second unit to be able to attack after you kill something. You can then use the stratagem Countercharge to heroically intervene a friendly core unit into that combat. Have your Warlord attack first, since he can with this trait even though he was charged, murder the enemy character, which then triggers the saga, and now because that saga is in effect, your core unit that you countercharge with can now attack the other unit before it gets a chance to attack. Again, this trait is incredibly powerful in melee versus melee matchups, especially when you consider that your whole army can heroically intervene because of your chapter tactic, or because you can have a single unit heroically intervene up to 6 inches because of that stratagem. And that's it for the Warlord traits that I would use in my competitive games of 40k for Space Wolves. With that said, those aren't the only sagas I'd use. Those are the only Warlord traits, but not the sagas. And that's because of the stratagem Deed of Legends that I mentioned in the stratagem section of this video. So this 1 command point stratagem allows any character, so not just your Warlord and not just unnamed characters, but any character, to gain a saga if they accomplish that saga's deed. So for something like Wolfkin, where you only have to kill a single model, well, if any of your characters end up killing a single model, you can pay 1 command point, and now that character has the saga that makes it so that friendly core Space Wolves units within 6 inches always get Shock Assault even if they didn't charge, get charged, or heroically intervene. Or how about the Deed of the Hunter? That deed just needs your character to successfully charge an enemy unit. So if you do that, then you can pay 1 command point to give that character the Saga of the Hunter, which allows friendly Space Wolf core units within 6 inches of that character to advance and charge. This is stupidly good on how easy it is to get off, especially because you can now use these sagas with any character, not just your Warlord. So throughout your game of 40k, always pay attention to when you can easily and safely trigger these deeds with different characters so that you can get as many buffs on your army as possible. On top of that, nowhere does it say that you can't double up on these deeds, meaning you can have multiple characters all with the same saga as long as they accomplish the appropriate deed to get that saga. So yeah, unlike before where we didn't really see sagas go off that much in games or be used that frequently, I feel like sagas are going to be used a lot now in Space Wolves, as long as the player is paying attention to what's happening in the game and looking for when they can trigger each deed with all their different characters. So I think this stratagem and the way sagas work now was a great change for Space Wolves. So now let's move on to relics, or I guess I should just say the relic. The Armor of Russ. This relic gives your character a 2+ save and a 4+ invul, so basically a storm shield. In addition, at the start of each fight phase, that character can select one enemy unit that it's in combat with, and that unit cannot fight until all eligible units have done so. This relic is incredibly good and again helps Space Wolves get an edge over other melee armies. Did you get charged by 10 Sanguinary Guard? Well, they fight last. Did you get charged by 20 Genestealers? Well, they fight last. Also, if you charge them with multiple units, they can't interrupt, which is amazing. The main downside to it is that your relic bearer has to be in combat with the unit that it wants to debuff, but that's where the stratagem countercharge comes in. And countercharge is free for characters. So for 0 command points, you can move your character up to 6 inches to get him into combat with your opponent's charging unit. Then that character can tell that unit to slow down a bit as he smacks them first. This stratagem is so incredibly strong right now just because of all the melee in the meta right now, and pretty much every army that you're going to go up against is going to have some powerhouse melee unit more often than not. The reason I say that this is the only relic I would take is because this is pretty much always going to be the free relic that I take, and I don't feel like any of the other relics are worth paying a command point for. It's not because they're bad, it's just because I want to save the command points for using actual stratagems and different combos that you can do. So in my personal list that I make for Space Wolves, this is the only relic that I would take. Now let's go over the spells that I like before we hop into my favorite units from the Space Wolves. Murderous Hurricane. This spell is Warp Charge 6 and it has 2 different uses. The first being that you can stop a unit from shooting Overwatch if they are on or within a terrain feature. This can be alright, but because of the restriction of them having to be in terrain, and because people have to pay for Overwatch now, this part of this spell isn't really that useful in my opinion. Like, it can be, but it's not something that you're going to use all the time. It's not the reason you take this spell, at least in my opinion. But the other use of this spell is amazing. You pick an enemy unit and that unit cannot fight in the next fight phase until all of your Space Wolf units that are in combat have attacked first. So yeah, Space Wolves really doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on melee superiority, since they have 4 different ways to stop enemy units from fighting before you, especially if you consider the Judicar as the 4th way to do this. So yeah, basically everything I'm getting from this book is that Games Workshop really wants Space Wolves to be the top melee army. They want them to be the counter melee army. And after reading these rules, that's really what it feels like. Tempest's Wrath. This spell is Warp Charge 6, and you pick an enemy unit within 24 inches, and that unit has to subtract 1 from their hit rolls in both shooting and melee until your next psychic phase. This can be really good to throw down on the enemy's powerhouse units to make them less efficient. Pretty straightforward. Instincts Awoken. This spell is Warp Charge 6 and allows you to pick a friendly Space Wolf unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. That unit counts as being in the Assault Doctrine until your next Psychic phase. So like I mentioned earlier that Space Wolves have multiple ways of getting their units to count as being in the Assault Doctrine, well, this is one of them. In addition to that, if the Assault Doctrine is currently active for your army, so turns 3+, then this spell gives that unit an extra -1 AP on attacks when they make a 6+ to wound for those attacks. So it still does have a use after turn 3, it's not like it just suddenly becomes useless on turn 3. And then the final spell I like for the Wolves is called Jaws of the World Wolf. This spell is Warp Charge 7, and you pick an enemy unit within 18 inches of the Psyker, and you roll a dice for each model in that unit. On rolls of 6+, you do a mortal wound, or rolls of 5+ if you rolled a 9 or more to cast the spell. This is a very good spell when up against massive blobs of infantry. Stuff like 30-man Orc Boy squads, 20-man Gaunts, units like that. Usually you'll get 2 to 5 mortal wounds out of this spell against a unit of 30 models, but there will definitely be times where you get 10 or more mortal wounds because the dice gods favored you that day. So this spell is definitely a good pickup against massive horde blobs. And that's it for the spells, so let's move on to the units that I like, and then we can call the video there. So for my favorite HQs from this new Space Wolf supplement, Arjak Rockfist. This guy is pretty much the best lieutenant equivalent the Space Wolves have to offer. But not only does he provide those rerolls of 1s to wound, he also has a pretty good melee profile with having 5 attacks on the charge, hitting on 2s with reserved +1 to hit to ignore modifiers of -1 to hit. He can reroll his own hit rolls when attacking enemy characters, which is great for fulfilling that one deed. And he has a 3-up invulnerable save, which is now incredibly rare in the game since the change to Storm Shields. So overall, this guy is a really great unit for his points. Ragnar Blackmane. Not much needs to be said about this guy. He's a beast. 10 attacks on the charge with a great profile, and he allows friendly Space Wolf core units within 6 inches to reroll 1s to hit, reroll charge rolls, and consolidate 6 inches instead of 3. All of this for only 130 points. Pretty nuts and an auto-include in any Space Wolf list in my opinion. Wolflord on Thunderwolf or Wolfguard Battle Leader on Thunderwolf. I like to run this guy alongside Ragnar and sometimes either a Primaris Librarian or Arjak. The main reason I like this guy is because I like to use him as my warlord every game. You can give him the exact traits that you want instead of being stuck to certain ones because your character's named, and you can actually give him relics unlike the named characters who can't take relics. He's also a decent beat stick since you can bring him with a thunder hammer, and there's no need to give him a storm shield because you're going to give him the armor of rust every game, which gives him the storm shield stats, so you can kit him out with a secondary weapon meant for chewing through chaff just in case you go up against something like orcs or another horde army, since the thunder hammer isn't going to be too efficient against those units. This unit has such great versatility that I would honestly take one every game. I don't want to say it's an auto-include for like everybody, but at least for me and the way I like to play Space Wolves, this is my go-to character alongside Ragnar, and then the third character is usually a toss-up between a few. Moving on to the troops that I like. Bloodclaws. So I think this unit is worth taking now with the updates from this book. I'd take them in units of 9 plus 1 Wolfguard and a Rhino, and if you're not doing that, then to be honest, I think it's better to just take Assault Intercessors if you want to keep them at like 5-man units, since the Assault Intercessors are going to be more points efficient in that smaller size. I've done a bunch of math and theory crafting on what's better between Bloodclaws and Assault Intercessors, too much to want to say in this video since it's going to bog down the time, but if you're really interested in what I have to say about that topic, then let me know down in the comments, and I might make a short 5 to 10 minute video on that subject for you guys. Assault Intercessors. They fit the bill really well in smaller units of 5 to avoid blast shenanigans. Usually I put them inside of an Impulsor to help them get up the board, and also because the Impulsor can absorb Overwatch for you or help with stuff like grabbing objectives or getting engaged on all fronts. Regular Intercessors. If you want to go for a more shooty route for some reason, then take the regular Intercessors over the Assault Intercessors. Still a pretty decent unit overall, but I still prefer the Assault variant in Space Wolves due to all the bonuses that Space Wolves get for melee. For the elite units, I like Hounds of Mordkai. This is the new unit given to Space Wolves in this supplement, and they're actually amazing. So this unit has a bunch of anti-psyker capabilities. Stuff like an 18-inch aura that forces enemy spellcasters to subtract 1 from their psychic tests, or if you're within 6 inches of those psykers have to subtract 2 from their psychic tests. This unit also can't be targeted by enemy spells unless they are the closest unit to that psyker, so not the closest visible, but just the closest. So one model hiding in a ruin closer to the enemy can stop these guys from getting hit by spells, which is great because if your opponent is psychic heavy, then they probably want to remove these guys as soon as possible. On top of that, they have a 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds that are done to them in the psychic phase, and they can shoot psykers while ignoring the Lookout Sir rule, and all of their damage is increased by 1 when targeting a psyker. This unit is nuts against psykers. I'd recommend bringing 1 or 2 units of 5 in every list, since even against armies that don't have psykers, these guys still have a ton of other uses since they are normal Reavers as well. So there's a few cool stratagems in the Space Marine Codex that you can use with these guys to make them even more useful. They also come with a ton of attacks as well, so they do synergize pretty decently with Space Wolves. So yeah, this unit is definitely one of my favorite additions to the new supplement. Blade Guard Veterans. I know this is a unit from the normal Codex, but I wanted to mention it because this unit is incredibly good in Space Wolves. With being able to hit on 2s, usually reroll 1s because of Ragnar or a Wolflord, if you make them count as if they're in the Assault Doctrine, or if you are in the Assault Doctrine, their swords will be -4 AP with +1 strength and 2 damage, so these guys will hit pretty damn hard. On top of that, they are very durable as well. 3 wounds each, 2-up save, and a 4-up invul. They are also Primaris, so you can use Primaris stratagems like Transhuman Physiology and the other ones from the Space Marine book. They are such a good unit for their points cost. I would include a unit of 5 with an Impulsor to transport them in every Space Wolf list I make. Possibly even 2 units of 5 in Impulsors if I can fit it. This unit is just that good. Murderfang. This guy's a beast. 8 attacks hitting on 2s, strength 12, minus 3 AP, or minus 4 if you're in the Assault Doctrine, and 3 flat damage, and he can reroll wound rolls. That is a beat stick and a half for only 150 points. He's super easy to get into combat as well since he only has 8 wounds, so he can run up behind your Impulsors or Thunderwolf Cavalry and get delivered into combat safely. He also has Duty Eternal built in as well, so he subtracts 1 damage from all damage he would suffer, which is pretty nice. But the one downside to this guy is that he doesn't have an invulnerable save, so if he does get smacked by something that has high AP, then as long as they made enough attacks, then they might just cut right through him. So yeah, he's not super durable, but he's definitely very killy, so you want to be the one to get the charge off with this guy instead of letting him get charged. Unless, of course, you have 2 command points left over that you're willing to spend, because you could use Only in Death Does Duty End to allow him to attack after he dies, since he is a character. He's also a Dreadnought, so you can use Wisdom of the Ancients on him to boost the rest of your army if needed. Not something I do every game, but it is an option if you need some rerolls. But yeah, I wouldn't say this guy is an auto-include, but he's definitely one of my favorite characters from this book, and by far my favorite Dreadnought. Thunderwolf Cavalry. So these guys got some nice buffs from their last iteration. They can now advance and charge, and they get +1 to their charges, so they can make it into combat more easily than before. They come with a ton of attacks and are pretty beefy at toughness 5, 4 wounds each, and with Storm Shields they have 2 up saves and 4 up invuls. And to be honest, I'd always take them with Storm Shields. As for their other weapon, if you need more anti-tank, go for hammers or fists if you can't afford the hammers. And to be honest, I still prefer the hammers over the fist because that 3 damage is just so much better than 2 damage and it really adds up over time when attacking big stuff. And the Thunder Hammers are going to be minus 3 AP anyways when you're in the Assault Doctrine, so yeah, I still think that they're better. A lot of the big stuff that you're going to be attacking, like elite units, are usually going to have invulnerable saves anyways, so that extra minus 1 AP from the Power Fist doesn't really do much. The only time it really comes into play is when you're attacking vehicles, but most vehicles you're going to be attacking anyways are going to be like a 3+ save with no invul, and because of all the ways that you can get these guys to count as being in the Assault Doctrine, forcing your opponent to only have a 6+ save on those anyways are good enough, especially when you're doing 3 damage a pop instead of 2 damage a pop. If you need some more anti-infantry in your list though, then you could just go with some chain swords or claws, but to be honest, I feel like you have other units in the army that can accomplish your anti-infantry role better, stuff like assault intercessors or blood claws. And I would use the Thunderwolf Cavalry more as an anti-elite, anti-tank unit. Moving on to the heavy support, there is only one option for wolves that I like, and you probably guessed it, it's Eradicators. This unit is just so good at being anti-tank for its points cost that, in my opinion, it's not really worth bringing anything else from the heavy support slot, at least for Space Wolves. For other armies, you could make an argument for other heavy support units, but for Space Wolves, just slap in 3 units of 3 Eradicators and boom, you got enough anti-tank in your list, especially if you have some Thunder Hammers slapping around in there as well. To be honest, I'm sure someone could win an RTT or a GT with something else in the heavy support slot, since there are some decent options. But again, this is mainly just the units that I would personally use if I were to play a competitive Space Wolf army. And that's going to be it for all the units that I would personally use if I were going to play Space Wolves competitively. So to summarize everything from this whole book and what I think of Space Wolves as a whole, I think Space Wolves are a very, very, very good anti-melee army. A lot of their stuff is like forcing the opponent to fight last or letting their own stuff fight first. They also have ways of doing counter charges. Their whole army can heroically intervene 3 inches because of the chapter tactic. So yeah, they just have a lot of anti-melee built into this list, and I really like that, especially in this current meta, which is a lot of melee armies. In fact, if I were to play in any tournaments at this moment, I think I would actually play Space Wolves over any other chapter. Maybe I would stick with Salamanders, but I'm really liking Space Wolves right now. So overall, I think this was a good addition for Wolves, and I think it gives them a nice little niche as like the counter melee army. They even have units, even though I didn't talk about them, but they do have units that are counter melee as well, like Wolfen, where they can attack when they die. The reason I didn't include Wolfen in here is because personally, with the changes to Storm Shields, I'm not sure about Wolfen's viability at this point in time. They did get some buffs, but with the Storm Shield nerf, I'm not sure if it's worth it yet, and I haven't had enough time to test them a lot. I do think they're a good unit, and I do think they have potential, and I'm sure there's someone out there that can still play them very well and do well with them, but at least for me, in the way I would build Space Wolves right now, I don't think I would include them, and I'd rather include like Thunderwolf Cavalry or Blade Guard Vets or something else over the Wolfen. But yeah, overall, I'm loving Space Wolves, and I think this was a great addition to the game, and I think Space Wolves are in a nice spot now. And that's going to be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. In fact, if you did enjoy it and possibly learn something from it, then please hit that like button since it does help out the video in the YouTube algorithm. And if you enjoy this type of content and would like to see more, then hit that subscribe button and that bell icon to be notified when I make new videos in the future. And if you did all that already and you still want to help support the channel, then feel free to check me out on Patreon. Patreon's the main source of income for the channel, and it's what allows me to make content like this for the community. I'll have a link for the Patreon page down in the description of this video. With that said, thanks to all my current patrons. You guys and gals are awesome, and I love you all. And thanks to all you regular viewers as well. I'm glad you all enjoy my videos and keep coming back for more. Well anyways, that's it for this one, so I guess I'll see you in the next video. Happy wargaming.